everybody. My name is Lee Henderson. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the managing director of Teatro Visión, and I want to welcome all of you to La Hora del Mitote, which is Teatro Visión's weekly live stream. We are here every Friday at 7 p.m. on Facebook and on YouTube, talking to different artists and creatives and activists and other members of our Teatro Visión community. And this is also your chance to make your comments, ask your questions. We'd love to hear from you. So if there's anything you want to add to the conversation or any questions you have for my guest, please do drop them in the comments on Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're watching, and we will do our best to answer all those questions for you. So I want to welcome my guest tonight is Rebecca Martinez. Thank you so much for joining us. And Rebecca is a extremely accomplished and multi-talented director, writer, producer, choreographer, facilitator, and our Teatro Visión community might know her name as the playwright for La Muerte Baila. We did La Muerte Baila as our Dia de Muertos show back in 2017, and we're also right now working on a virtual version of La Muerte Baila as our 8th annual Dia de Muertos production that we're trying to bring to you here in 2020. So hi, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for staying up to talk to us from the East Coast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited. I'm excited to see what y'all are going to do.
Well, so are we. It's been an interesting process. So I've got some questions to start us off with. Excuse me one second. Sorry, we've got this fires and smoke and everything going on here. So if I'm coughing a little bit, I apologize. But I thought I'd ask some questions to start with, just about like you and your practice as an artist and some of the other projects you work on, and then maybe move into questions about La Muerte Baila specifically. But again, any of you out there, if you want to join the conversation or if you have questions you want to ask Rebecca, please do feel free to do that, because we love to have that kind of participation. So I thought I would start by asking, I know you've done a lot of work in ensemble theaters like Sojourn, and I know Milagro you work with has a lot of ensemble elements as well. And I think that might be a way of doing theater that not everybody in our Teatro Visión audience and community is familiar with. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what it's like to create theater in that way as part of an ensemble, and maybe what you enjoy about it.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I've learned over time is that each ensemble sort of develops its own personality and its own way of working. There are so many different ways of working, and devised theater in the U.S. has become a lot more of a regular practice. It's been a practice outside of the U.S. for quite some time, but probably within, I would say, the last 15 years or so, it has become much more prevalent here in the United States too. And when I often enter into spaces, I talk about how I bring my ensemble values into space, and it really feeds the work I do as a director, the work that I do in whatever spaces that I'm in. And when I say that, what I mean is I come from a background where a lot of it was a director-led ensemble, like Sojourn Theater is a director-led ensemble, but it was a place where all of us as performers were not just performers, we were creator performers. We were making with, even if we didn't write the text, we were still making in the room. And we came together, we created work, we created a lot of work. A lot of it would get thrown away, as you have to do. In the editing process, but we would make work that was improv based, that was movement based, that was game based, that had just structures for different types of audience involvement and engagement and participation, and also thinking about overall arc of the show and thinking of story. So there were lots and lots of different things that we were asked to do as an ensemble. And the other thing that I really appreciated about being an ensemble is that because we worked together regularly, we developed shorthand, we could understand each other's process, And we also included designers in that process, and we included our stage manager in that process. So folks were always, I mean, a lot of times, even now as a professional director in larger institutions, stage managers are often to the side and doing very, very important work, but often don't feel like they have agency to speak to the creative work. And that was something that in the world that I was in was like, if you're in the room, we're all working together to create the story. So everybody is working together to do it in whatever way they are, but everyone has a creative voice that they can share. And it's my job as a director to sort of facilitate that, when it's an open time for all voices to be welcome, and when is it time for some decisions to be made, and one person or two people sort of pushing the work forward, and helping to shape what it ultimately looks like. And that's very much how we worked as an ensemble with Sojourn Theater, and still work, because I'm still with Sojourn after a lot of years. And my work with Milagro was a different type of ensemble. I started in the dance company, and so that was that was very much a different practice. Dance is such an intentional and specific practice. And so there was a lot of rehearsal that way. There was a lot of like, how do we build and get better and create our skills, and create not just and build the skills, not just individually, but of the whole company, so that when we're going out and performing, we're bringing something that is rigorous and shows has cultural integrity, and is something that we can also, because we did a lot of performances for schools and communities, but that shows our audiences, a lot of our audiences' cultures reflected on stage. So that was a different type of ensemble work, but also a type of work that I really love and enjoy. And then from there, I started working with the theater company, and I toured around a lot, and with Teatro Milagro, and so when I started making work with the as a director, part of how we shaped the Dia de Muertos shows back then was through the dance company. So we would bring the dance company together, and we would put together a show of dances and music, and then we would start to create a loose narrative that may or may not connect any of it. And sort of gradually, this is not a question you asked, but I'm going to
no, keep talking. This is fascinating.
But sort of gradually through the years, we started to get like a little bit more connective tissue into the performances themselves, into the shows themselves. And so then it became a tradition over the years that the Dia de Muertos show at Teatro Milagro, at Milagro Theater, became devised. They were devised shows. And so now they have a dance background, but sometimes it's all text, sometimes it's text and music and dance, sometimes it is very little text and a lot of movement, but not necessarily dance. Some of it is clown. So there's lots and lots and lots of variations within that world of ensemble devised and ensemble created performance. But it's like, how do we get together and creación colectiva is work together as a collective to create this work, understanding that there does have to be someone eventually who is like, okay, yeah, let's edit this out. Let's not do that. Let's do this together. What do we think? Do we like it? Okay, now everyone has to learn their lines.
Do you find that sometimes it's a difficult skill for, like, is it a different skill set as an artist, as an actor, as a designer, and let me say, first of all, as a I work as a designer and a stage manager sometimes, so I love what you were saying about also considering, those artists as part of the collective that's creating this work. I love that. Um, but is it a hard skill set for an artist to make a change to working in that way versus working in what conventionally is a more typical way of working in the theater here in the United States, at least?
Some people really like the structure of a set script and knowing what they're walking into. Many people do. And I think it takes some folks who have a different type of adventurous spirit, because any type of performance in front of an audience, I believe, is you need to be a little adventurous.
Yeah.
But where folks are able to live with risk and uncertainty, and trust, you have to have trust that we will come out with something at the end of it. And so it's a definite muscle, and it's one that, like, I've done ensemble devising with undergrads and who have like latched onto it immediately and like have come out of it with all kinds of amazing stuff, even though they may not have been the most skilled performers initially, but because they were able to create work that came from themselves, they were able to create it to fit themselves. And, because they were early in their process of learning. And then I've worked with professional actors who were like, what is this? Get me out of here. Give me a script. Give me some lines. I will learn them. So it's a different way of working for sure, but it is 100% a different kind of muscle. And then the work that we did with Sojourn was even more of a different kind of muscle, because a lot of what we had to do was not just like ensemble devise, but we would create work, and then we would also, often performers would have to facilitate dialogue with the audience while performing.
Oh, wow.
And so there's no fourth wall. It is like, here you are, performer to audience, and whatever you are, whatever's going on, you also have to put a facilitator hat on and sort of guide a conversation and then jump back into a scene. So that itself is like a way, way different muscle. But it's something that both is like, and it's another thing like where folks really either grab onto it or are like, nah.
That's a really good segue into the next thing I wanted to ask you about, actually, which is you're talking about making the community, breaking that fourth wall, making the community or the audience a part of what you're doing. And I know you've done a lot of different work that involves contributions from community in different ways. And that's something we really value here and try to do at Teatro Visión too, is to create work that's not just us performing, it's us creating something together with the community around us, right? And so, the ulterior motive then is like me picking your brain on how we can continue to do this work successfully, right? What do you find is important to ensuring that these collaborations with your community are successful?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of thoughts. I have a lot of thoughts on that, of course, but I sort of always go back to like my roots, which my very first play I was in with Milagro was a health education play that we took to farm workers, and we took it to, to the places where they lived and while they were working. And so what we did is it was a tour, but like I had to change in the van, and there were dogs walking through the set. We were just right there in front of like the sinks or wherever outside, wherever we were. Like I've performed in laundromats, I've performed in libraries, health centers, like a gazillion gyms, outside in parks, everywhere. And there's one thing about there's a type of performance that is, we're bringing the work to where the folks are. Like wherever people are, we're going to bring the work there to make it like as accessible And a lot of the work that we did with Milagro, particularly the health-based work, had and they're still doing lots and lots of work that I'm not involved in, so I'm not as familiar with the more recent work, but it continues in the same vein of thinking community first. But a lot of the work that we did was with the with like partnerships with health organizations and just different departments, so that we could get folks services right away. Like our thing was, we got funding to do a breast cancer education play with the goal of getting women of above a certain age, I think it was above the age of 40, to get them to get mammograms. And so we created, like, we did interviews with people. We created this like little 30-minute novela that was basically sort of demystified the process of doing breast checks, like self-examinations, and made it really silly and made it funny and made it dramatic, all the things, like all the highs and lows of a telenovela. And then people could come and see it, and they could immediately go and get access to health services, or get access to the folks who could then get them to what they needed for health services. And sometimes, our audiences were all men. Like there was one audience we had that were all men that were like crying and like, we're going to have our mothers and our wives get checked, and, like all these things. So like that has a very immediate effect, which, and then there's sort of the work that I did with Sojourn, which also involved partnering, but partnering to get folks to be in conversation with each other about topics that and values that collide, or may have to live together in a same place, because those humans live together in the same place and they have to share resources. And having conversations about like how do we live together when there's difference in what we each value, and how do we host a space where different perspectives, ideological perspectives, are welcome, are expressed, so that those folks who, now that they're in a room together, are actually able to have a conversation with someone who has a radically different perspective than they do. And that often takes partnering with different organizations that you can be ideologically opposed to, or making sure that there's in the performance itself different points of view that we don't, like we as creative performers don't agree with. And how do we bring those voices into the space so that we're not coming and inviting people to a performance and saying, this is what we want you to believe, but here's a large amount of perspectives. Hopefully you find your own perspective in there, so you feel heard, you feel validated, and now we want to ask you actually to dig a little deeper and listen and consider someone else's perspective. And we did a lot of, still do a tremendous amount of partnerships, but we partnered with the Department of Education. We partnered with, we had civic and municipal partners. We partnered with the town of Molalla, Oregon, with the city council there, and with the art council, and basically we partnered with the historical society. But like each project that we thought of, it was a different type of partnering, because it wasn't like, here's our community, here are our neighbors, but it was, how do we bring people together from different perspectives to have a conversation? And in order to do that, and to do that, who do we need to bring in the room? Who do we need to partner with in order to bring in both audiences and information that we don't already have? And so this is a super long answer. But the one thing about one of the shows that we did, called How to End Poverty in 90 Minutes, with 199 people you may or may not know, we had multiple partners with multiple levels, and we couldn't do the show without like 25 different partners because of the nature of the show itself, because a number of tickets or a $1,000 out of ticket sales every night was given to an organization that's fighting poverty in the area wherever we were performing the show. And so to be able to do that, you need to have lots and lots of folks at the table who can both talk about issues from a hyper local perspective, but also who can help guide and direct to make sure that what we're doing as artists with our small, we're aware people in the world, but we don't know everything. So how do we bring in perspectives and other folks who can help us think and interrogate the work that we're doing to push us to make sure that we're considering viewpoints that we may not normally include. So that was sort of a long answer.
No, it was a great answer. No, it's fascinating. I just, it's got to be so challenging getting buy-in from all those different partners and organizations and government entities or something. How do you do that? And it's a way that it's an approach that I don't think a lot of those organizations, I assume, are familiar. Like this would be their first time taking this approach of using theater as a way of bringing together different viewpoints and finding ways to talk to each other, right? Do you get resistance when you approach these other organizations? How do you get them to get on board with your project?
Yeah, that's a good question. Some of it is, I like to think of partnership as being something that feels organic, and not all partnership is something that should be pursued or needs to be pursued. But what is it that feels beneficial for both parties? Like that feels really important. And what are the goals? What are the visions of whatever the project is? And if it how does that serve which each partner is looking to do for themselves, and how can coming together amplify something that both partners are interested in doing? And I mean, just to give an example of the same show that I was talking about, we did performances in Cleveland with Cleveland Public Theater, and we worked with United Way. And it was all this, I mean, Cleveland Public Theater is tremendous job doing partnerships in their area. And one of the things that the United Way was talking about was that they wanted to have a different way to talk with their constituents about poverty reduction. So they were like, is there an arts-based way that we can think about this? And so because it was something that was already on their mind, because it was something that was already in their interest, then it felt like this is a good match. This is a good fit for how we're doing, and for the work that we both have, and the visions that we have, and how we can come together. But all partnering takes work. All partnering takes deep listening. It takes commitment. It also takes knowing when partnerships are not healthy, and not all partnerships, like all relationships, it doesn't mean that once you get into a partnership that you have to stay with that partner forever. That folks should have the ability to, test something out. And if it doesn't seem like it's serving, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay to not continue with that partnership. So I think when we feel resistance, or when we hear something like that, then it makes us either look at what is it that we're doing is what we're doing maybe at not a good fit for what the goals of this organization or this collective. And so is there someone else that we're going with? Or if it's what they're doing, it feels important enough to think about what it is that we're doing, and do we need to shift something? So I think those are a couple of things that I personally think of a lot when it comes to partnering.
Thank you. No, that's Great. And I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about La Muerte Baila because we have a question from someone watching on Facebook, which is a good moment for me to remind anyone else out there watching on Facebook and YouTube. We would love to answer your questions as well. So if you have other questions for Rebecca about what she's talking about or anything else, please drop them in the comments on Facebook or on YouTube, wherever you're watching. But this question is from Jean-Pierre, who is one of our actors. Hi, Jean-Pierre. Thank you for joining us, who was in the cast of our La Muerte Baila back in 2017. And he wants to know, he never had the chance to ask you, what inspired you to write La Muerte Baila?
Yeah, for me, when I think of writing, because writing's hard for me. So when I think about writing, there always wants to be something that feels personal or feels like I'm writing from a place that I know and I understand. And so this La Muerte Baila was the title was actually given to me by Olga Sanchez, who was the artistic director at the time. She's like, we want you to do the show, and it's going to be called La Muerte Baila. Go. So it's like, okay, great, got that. And then I started thinking about reconciliation, and I started thinking about what happens, and it's personal. You know, it comes from like a perspective of something I experienced in my family, but of what happens when, at the moment of death, you want to reconcile, but whatever it is that you're holding on to, whatever it is that person is holding on to, you just can't get to that point. And what does that do to a person? What does that do to those who are left here? And what does that do to the person who is no longer with us in a corporeal form? And so just thinking about that was something about like, what is the journey and the struggle to get to a place of reconciliation and forgiveness? So that's where that came from.
Thanks. Do you want to, what else can you tell us about the creative process that you went through to create La Muerte Baila? Did it involve some of this ensemble work that you were talking about earlier? What else where did that all come from? How did it come about?
I knew I wanted it to be musical. That was something that we talked about also with Milagro. Like, how do we bring it back to sort of like the dance roots? And so I knew, and I mean, I'm just always ready to throw some music and dance and anything. I'm like, let's do it. So it's a love of mine as well. And I had some collaborators on it, Rosa and Sherman Floyd, who we danced together back in the dance company back in the day. And I'll work with them on anything at any time. And so I brought them in along with one of their frequent collaborators, Susan Jacobo, who they played music and danced together in a little conjunto quite often. So like they came sort of as a bit of a package, and they understood, and they knew each other's musical style. And it was like through talking with Sherman and Rosa and Susan that was sort of the idea of like, what if it comes with the idea of the fandango, and we think about how the fandango and how the community feel of it, and the music, the jarocho music, how that and the like the styling from Veracruz, but the community version of it, as opposed to like the more presentational forms of the dance of son jarocho, of how do we think about that shaping the piece itself. So it came, so like the music part of it in the original production came just from being in conversations with them of like, what would the music sound like, and what are you interested in playing? How does that fit into the world? And we can just fit in however, like we'll figure it out. But let's think about the core of that. And so that very much came from, but that was also, like it's a relationship based. So we've known each other for years and worked together on many Muerto shows. And so that was really fun to dive in that way and to dive in a different way than we've done before. And as for the actors, I know we spent a lot of time just thinking about characters and just thinking about what their story arcs were and who they wanted to play. I mean, we knew there was La Muerte. She was there. And I knew that there was this son and mother that were trying to come together. And then the others is like, how do we fit in and how do we think about who these people are and how can they both be fun, but also how can they support the story and the journey of this son who's trying to reach his mother. Yeah.
They're such fun characters too. I mean, yeah, I think, you're talking about, how they support the story, but just all those characters in their own right have such a strong story and a strong personality to them. Is that something that came about through your work with the actors, or is that something?
Yeah. There's actually another thing that I sort of like brought. There were some ideas that we brought, and then there were some ideas that that the actors, so it was an exchange. I had a cast with very strong personalities, so strong personalities could also come out with very strong characters, I think. And the character from Nebraska, for example, there's a character from Nebraska who was back from like the 1800s. I can't quite remember the year, but I grew up in Nebraska, and she was inspired by, I lived in this little town, and I used to go to the cemetery often as a kid. My sister and I used to ride our bikes there. And it was the oldest gravestone in the cemetery. And I was fascinated by it because it had this like verse that it just like drew me to it every time. And the verse was, young people, something like this. Young people think as you are now. No. Young people stop as you are. So young people stop as you walk by, as you are now. So once was I, as I am now, soon you will be. Prepare for death and follow me. And it just hit me. And I found out that it was a young woman who died from a fever, who, as her family was, coming to live on land that was taken from Indigenous folks, but coming to try to make their own home in it. And she was buried somewhere else, and her grave was eventually moved to the cemetery in Schuyler. But I was also thinking of like, what does that mean for someone who is sort of lost, who ends up in a place far away from any of their family, any of their friends, basically anyone who would remember them, and had been gone for so long that maybe there isn't anyone to put something on an altar for them. And I've always wanted to put that in a show, and it ended up in this one. So it was like, okay, let's put it in here for this one. And yeah. And then there was I think the other thing that I thought about a lot about in the show was how to involve the audience and how to use like my experience participatory theater as a way to make this not just a show that is entertainment, but something that is actually a remembrance and actually a moment where we have folks bring memories into space, and we're making a space for those memories, whatever that means, however they want to do it. But to host a space for the memories of loved ones who we've lost. And we have lost a lot this year. Not just this year, but this, it's been a hard year. It's been a rough year. So how to continue to think about I think about that a lot in performance, the role of audience in performance. So how to make something that feels like it is a space for audiences to have an experience that is unique to themselves, but that is a real experience. Like, I'm like, we're not going to go and pretend. This is real stuff. This is real stuff that we have to deal with, and this is, it's not a it's a fun celebration, but it's also how I learn, it's like you laugh, but the tears are real. Yeah.
What is that? What would you say you hope people take away when they watch La Muerte Baila?
I would say, I hope people have a good time. I hope people receive the beauty of music, and however that, I know that like online is tough for figuring out like how to do music, but that's something to hold the complexity of joy and sorrow and how that can live together. And to know that I would say that performance is a place, like this performance, this show is a place and a container to welcome them however they are, and welcome folks however they want to process or grieve or not, but just to allow, come and be how you are, however you are, and know that you're welcome.
Thank you. I just want to quickly again remind anyone out there watching, this is our weekly live stream broadcast, La Hora del Mitote, and we are here every Friday at 7, so thank you all for joining us. I actually have another question for you, Rebecca, from somebody watching on Facebook. Juanita wants to know what advice you would give to people who would like their own stories or would want to write their own stories.
I would say just do it. I don't know if it's a good thing to say or not, but I've never taken I haven't trained professionally as a writer. And I sort of learned by doing, and I learned from reading and watching others and sort of studying my own way of studying, and knowing what feels truthful to me and what doesn't. It doesn't mean I can always fix it. I can always fix script issues. But I think that there is don't let perfection get in the way of the what is that saying? Don't let the perfection be the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
And how to if you want to write, how to just start with what feels interesting and curious and truthful to you, and go from there and let it see where it takes you. And I think for me, I get very inspired by music, and I get very inspired by dance and visual art when I write. And so there's something that either there's music that I listen to when I write, or I'll see an image and I'll use that image as something that inspires me to think about, to get out of myself, because I sometimes I get limited in the idea of just words. So how to allow myself to expand imagination. And then I think the other thing that I really love about theater is that it doesn't all have to be spoken with words. So what are the other ways of communication and storytelling? What could be movement? What could be breath? What could be sound? What could be music? How to think of what is a feeling or an experience I want to convey, and what is the emotion I want behind it, and how do I allow that emotion to come through whatever the writing may end up being. Yes.
I love that idea too, that you were saying you don't have, you're not trained, you're not conventionally trained as a writer, and that's okay, right? That everybody can find their own way, and you don't need a certain qualification or a degree, or there shouldn't be that gatekeeper as to who gets to tell their stories in what way, right? That we all have our experience, and we all have our stories and our ways of telling them, and and just tell it,
Yeah. A lot is made of Ivy League writers, and
right.
And I know a lot of Ivy League writers, and they're lovely, fantastic, fierce artists. And but I knew that I could never do that. I knew that was not my path. And I know that's like not a lot of people's path.
Yeah.
So how do we still give ourselves permission and make space to make work on our terms? Is what it took me a long time to be like, well, how do I give myself permission to do this? And and so I think I find it like such an important part of expression. I haven't done it for a while now, so I'm like, oh, I kind of want to do it again. But it is something that if you want to do it, just do it.
I just wanted to say hi to Diane, who I know. Diane Vega is our production manager, and she's out there watching. Just wanted to say hi.
Hi, Diane. Yeah. It was so nice when I was able to come and see everybody back in, when was that?
2017, yeah.
2017. That was so lovely. It was just beautiful to be able to spend some time with just with the cast and hearing some of it. And I don't know how many of the same folks are going to be in this production. I didn't get to see the original production, but I just like the energy is so beautiful in the company, and it was just so fun. And I still follow people on Facebook and like spy on them. I'm like, what are you doing?
Oh, thanks.
So
well, we were so happy to have you here then too. Yeah, and we have some of the same artists working on this one, and some new ones, some new folks as well. But yeah, I'm sorry we can't, bring
but
you
I
out
can
in the
see
same
it.
way.
I can see it because it's virtual. So
That's true. That is at least the nice part. You don't have to be here to see it anymore. Yeah, which is maybe a good segue to another question I was thinking about. I know we've been talking so much about collaboration in the way that you work. Are you able to do that now that you can't come together with people? Are you still working virtually? Do you have projects that you're just on hold because of this?
Yeah, I had a lot of stuff that evaporated.
Yeah.
Like just disappeared and probably won't come back. And some stuff that seems to be on hold for, who knows how long. And just like so many folks. I have done a little bit of making in the digital virtual world. And I didn't at first just because I was just too overwhelmed. We had to move in March when New York was shutting down. And with a little baby, I was like, I can't. I just have to exist and make it from one day to the next. And then I was able to actually do a really short, I did it because they were like, it's only 4 hours of rehearsal. And I thought, I can do 4 hours of rehearsal. Ended up being a little longer. But a show that was like a one-on-one show. So it was one actor, one audience member. And the technology worked so that the audience member was actually able to look in the eyes of the actor while they were speaking. So it was a direct connection. And I found it, and I just treated it like film, but film that was live, that was connective. And it was short. It was like 5 minutes long. And by a writer named Carmelita Tropicana. So it was it's Theater for One. It's actually still running. Here we are here is what the whole suite is, and it's 8 short micro plays. that are basically one audience member, one performer. And I found that to be so intimate and connective in a way that sort of woke me up again after several months of like, I can't do it, I can't make, I don't know what to do. And so I've been thinking about how to use the digital space as a way to connect, how to think about it as a maker, and think about it as not just a place where you host Zoom meetings, which is very necessary. It's necessary. It's how we work now. We still have to develop work. There's still stories to be told, and there's still artists working, thankfully. But how to think about these digital platforms as ways to connect in ways that we hadn't been able to before, because we weren't able to all be physically in the same place, and our geography is now, like no one's in New York anymore. Everyone's somewhere else. And so how to think about it as a benefit and use the digital platforms for the strengths without spending too much time on the sadness of the loss, but how do we build on using the tools, the benefit of the tools that we have now as makers. So that's been a lot of what I've been thinking about and trying to play a little bit with.
Are you making anything now you want to tell us about?
I have something. I can't talk about it yet, but there's an idea that I'm playing with that will be a performative piece. That the whole idea is how do we connect? Again, I always think of how do we connect audience to audience, audience to performer. And I'm thinking of it as a site-specific piece built, like if Zoom is a platform, for example, built on Zoom, as opposed to a site-specific piece built in, a geographic location if it's in a virtual location. And how do we think of it as a way that performance allows us to actually connect to each other and makes that invitation where normally we wouldn't have the space to do that. Yeah. So it's an idea that is cooking that will.
Well, when it's ready, will you tell us about it? Because it sounds like we could participate from here, right? That we can, whenever it's done, we might be able to watch it, even though we're miles apart.
Yeah, and part of the idea is like, how do I get collaborators who are in other places other than where I
am? Again, those of you out there that are watching, we have about 10 minutes left before our hour is up. So if you have other questions you want to ask Rebecca, please ask them. We would love to answer your questions, respond to your comments, hear what's on your mind. Rebecca, is there anything else you want to tell us about in terms of, of where your work is going now, of things that are on your mind in this ongoing challenging world that we all live in right now?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about how do we keep ourselves going? How do we I had one of my mentors ask me, are you one of those people who is afraid to work in digital space? And I thought, no, it's different, but I'm not afraid of it. It's just a different challenge. But I also realized that there is a certain amount of privilege to be able to have some sort of freedom to be able to make at this moment, and how so many folks are just like, it's surviving and going from day to day. And I also think about like, what is my role as an artist at this moment? I've been thinking a lot about that. And I know that in some cases, my role as an artist, how I feel it is how do I think about reflecting back my experience? I don't think I'm that unique of a person. And if there's something I'm going through and I'm feeling, I feel like somebody else will feel it as well. I always think that as a director, I'm like, well, if I make this choice, well, I'm not the only one who would like this. At least one other person will like it. Is how I always imagine when I'm like questioning choices I make as a director. But so I think I've been thinking a lot about how do we find refreshment for ourselves? How do we find those places of rest? And not doing that and not letting go of all the things that have to be done in this country so that we can safeguard and protect people. Political things aside, not aside at all. Political things right front and center.
Yeah.
But how to find places of rest, and what is the artist's role? How's my role as an artist? To create those places of rest and rejuvenation so that we have the strength to do the surviving and to do the fight and to do the moving forward and do the reimagination. And I don't know that theater will look the same when we come back. In some ways, I hope it won't. But storytelling will not die. It won't. And theater will not die. It just won't. Because it's been around too long and you can do it with so little. And we hope that we are able to bring some institutions with us through this who have been doing that kind of work, who are being hard hit, like really hard hit right now, and understanding that and holding place for that too. But just trying to maintain of like, what is the rest? What is the hope? Where are the bright spots that we can offer and find? I would say, as I say we, but I'm saying me as an artist. This is my sort of how I'm thinking and framing about things.
But probably somebody agrees with you, right?
Probably so. At least one other person.
You're not alone.
Yeah, so I think that's a lot of what I've been thinking about, just in terms of making. And like, I've just been in conversation also just recently about like, what does it mean to get back to the roots of theater as resistance, and thinking about hyperlocal work that is in person, which I also really appreciate, the sort of return to hyperlocal. And we're so used to being spread out geographically, particularly in New York. Like, people are coming from all over the boroughs. But what happens? Like, I have been in my neighborhood since mid-March. I've left Brooklyn once since mid-March, and I've been in my neighborhood. I left, to take my baby to the doctor, like, twice. So it's like, I am local. And what does it mean to just engage that much with your surroundings and be fully present with the people around you, your neighbors that maybe you wouldn't see because you're running so much, your environment, and what does that do to storytelling, and what does that do to the work and the experience, the artistic experience that you want to make for somebody else. So I've been on my mind a lot.
Yeah, boy, that's such an interesting point, because you hear so much now about how place doesn't matter in the same way if we're doing so much on Zoom or on remotely, right? It doesn't matter in that way as much where you are. But you're absolutely right in terms of where you physically are. I think for most of us, certainly it sounds like for you, certainly for me, is so much smaller, than it was a year ago, right? I'm like you, I so seldom leave my immediate circle anymore. But yeah, I mean, that's just it is really interesting to think about what that means as a member, as a person who exists in this place right now, with the same other people who are existing in this place right now.
Yeah, I think of citizenship in a different way.
Yeah.
And I think of responsibility in a different way. And what does it mean to, I mean, like, this is the first summer that I've had to really devote on taking care of flowers that I've planted. Like, I planted flowers by seed and they grew.
That's impressive. That's not something I've ever done successfully.
It happened since I was a child. It only happens because I had another theater friend who she said, if you write me a card, I'll write you a card. And I wrote her a card. She wrote me a card and it had seeds in it. And I planted them and they grew into flowers. I was like, okay, this is amazing. I know people do that all the time, but for me, it was amazing.
Oh, yeah. No, for sure. There's a lesson in there somewhere, right? About growing and nurturing. I think that, yeah.
And I've been hearing a lot of people saying, like, you know, like, everyone has to nurture, everyone has to give, everyone has to find a place to, but that their plants are getting a lot of love. And I think there is, like, I know the plants out here that I have, it took me a while to get them planted, but I take such pride in their beauty because it gives me rest and it's connected me to neighbors who are also into the same thing. And so it's sort of like little mini soul roots that I'm putting down in this new neighborhood that I'm in, that, you know, I lived in, not that far away, but a totally different street for a number of years. And now I'm like unmoored and living somewhere else. And it's, and like, what are the things that we do? What are the things that we do to take care of ourselves? What are the things that we do to offer to others? Is the thing that I think about that with, like, the plants, because it's not just me, it's an offering to others too, especially when they're gifted.
Could say that about theater too, right? It's an offering.
100%. Theater doesn't, like, I've never done theater where I don't think about the audience and think about that, and think about, like, what are we doing, what are we making together, and what are we hoping folks are going to receive, and how are we hoping that folks will experience this, and not like what is the message anyone's taking away, but what is a feeling, what is an emotion, what is a experience that I hope, and then leave it out there and just let folks experience however it works for them. Yeah.
Well, that was beautiful. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for spending some time with us and for staying up, because I know it's, what is it, 11 o'clock there now?
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you, everybody out there who's watching and commenting and supporting us. It's lovely to have you here, as always. Again, we're here every Friday at 7 for La Hora del Mitote, talking to different members of our community. And if you want to see Rebecca's work when we do La Muerte Baila, we are, stay tuned to our website at teatrovision.org/La Muerte Baila, and you can find information there about how you would be able to access that. Any last words you want to leave us with?
I'm great. I'm grateful for this time, and I'm grateful, and I'm so excited to see what y'all are going to do with this show. I'm really excited about that.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Have a good night, and thank you all out there, and have a good night, all of you as well. And we will see you next week.